For 8 years, Edith May Jenkins, a quiet woman from rural Nebraska, meticulously baked cookies every Friday and sent them to strangers in uniform. This silent ritual was her way of honoring her son, Thomas, a Marine killed in Iraq. Despite facing skepticism from her community and never receiving a single reply, Edith persevered, driven by a quiet promise in Thomas's memory. Then, one cold Friday morning, her trembling fingers penned a raw, personal truth on a note. My son loved these before he was taken from me. What Edith couldn't know was that this particular tin of cookies would travel halfway across the world and land in the hands of Captain Eric Langford, the very last man to see her son alive. What incredible revelation will unfold next? If Edith's incredible journey of quiet strength and unwavering love resonated with you, imagine the other powerful stories waiting to be shared. Subscribe to my channel today for more inspiring tales of hope, resilience, and the profound impact of simple acts of kindness. Your support helps us bring these forgotten promises to light. Every Friday, long before the first hint of sunlight touched the horizon, Edith May Jenkins quietly rose from bed. She didn't do it for recognition. She wasn't seeking company. There were no posts, no praise, no expectations. She simply baked dozens of cookies, week after week, and sent them off to strangers wearing uniforms. The packages bore no return name, just a simple line, "From a mother who remembers." She never received a reply, not once, but that never stopped her. Storms, aching joints, grief too large for words. Through it all, she kept baking. Then one morning, the air cracked open with thunder, not from the sky, but from a Black Hawk helicopter landing right in the middle of her cornfield. Dust and stalks flew as 6 soldiers stepped out, solemn in full dress uniform. One of them cradled a folded flag, another held her son's dog tags. And for the first time in all these silent years, Edith, quiet, steady Edith, heard the words no letter had ever carried. She had never expected anyone to come, certainly not the military. Who was she, after all, to warrant such attention? Down a narrow dirt road in rural Nebraska, past the whispering fields of golden wheat and tall, rustling corn, stood a humble white farmhouse. Its paint was chipped, the shutters weathered, and the old porch swing creaked in rhythm with the prairie wind. It wasn't grand, not even close, but to Edith, it was her whole world. She was 73 now, though you'd be forgiven for thinking she'd lived a century or more. The people of Fairview would often say Edith carried the kind of quiet weight that comes from having known both bottomless love and unbearable sorrow. She moved slower these days, careful and deliberate. Her hand, speckled with liver spots and stiff from arthritis, had stirred more bowls and shaped more dough than some bakeries do in a lifetime. Edith had never left Fairview. The daughter of a mechanic and a piano teacher, she was born and rooted in Nebraska. No college, no big city dreams. Not even after her heart was shattered did she consider leaving. Her late husband, Carl, was her high school sweetheart, a veteran of the Korean War. They married young and built a life as simple and sweet as the pies she was famous for. They raised chickens, shared quiet mornings, and brought one boy into the world, Thomas. Thomas was her light, gentle and soft-spoken, with a lopsided grin and a wisdom beyond his years. He was the kind of son who lingered in kitchens just to be close. He'd help her sift flour, sneak cookie dough when he thought she wasn't looking, and deliver warm pies to neighbors with a sense of purpose. She remembered the exact moment he stood in the doorway, wearing his marine dress blues back straighter than ever. He said he wanted to serve something greater than himself, just like his father. But 2006 came, and with it, a knock on the door that split her world. 2 men in uniform stood silent on her porch. No sentence they spoke could prepare her. Her only child, Corporal Thomas Jenkins, was gone, killed by a roadside bomb outside Fallujah. He was 23. After that, Edith never remarried. She never packed up. She just stayed. The house grew quieter, the rooms echoing with memory. She retired after 40 years as Fairview High's beloved lunch lady and filled her days with smaller things. Church on Sundays, scripture with morning coffee, pies for the county fair, especially peach. Her pies were more than just desserts. They were little vessels of memory. She still saw Thomas there, reaching over the counter to snatch a slice of peach when he thought she wasn't watching. She kept teaching Sunday school at Zion Baptist. She still brought hot casseroles to every funeral, and on the wall of her living room beside the family Bible hung Thomas's photograph, framed and dusted weekly, as if he might walk back in and take his place beneath it. Her only constant companion now was Duke, an aging golden retriever with a soft muzzle and slower gait, who never left her side. She lived modestly, just enough from her pension and Social Security, and never wished for more. She had no smartphone, no social media. The world had spun on past her in a blur of noise and brightness, but Edith stayed still. She never complained. Yet despite the calm on her face, the space in her chest where her son had once lived never fully closed. She was a mother who had lost everything, and she was about to find out that the world hadn't forgotten. Not her son, and not the steady, quiet love she sent out with every package of cookies. It was a still evening, late in the fall. Outside, the wind rattled the old farmhouse windows like a visitor too impatient to wait. Edith sat alone in the living room, wrapped in a soft, hand-knitted blanket, while the television glowed softly across the faded photographs on the mantel. Duke lay curled at her feet, snoring gently. The evening news droned on in the background. Something about Syria, she thought, half listening. Just another conflict in a world that never stopped burning. Then something caught her attention. The camera zoomed in. A group of soldiers, young and hollow-eyed, sat beneath a makeshift tarp in the desert. Their uniforms were dusty, their faces sun-beaten and exhausted. One of them, no older than Thomas had been, looked into the lens with an expression Edith couldn't describe. Not sorrow, not fear, just weight. Something in that moment made her sit a little straighter, her hands tightening around the blanket. She didn't know it yet, but something was coming, something real, something that would remind her. Love, even when unspoken, even when unanswered, never truly disappears. He gave a sheepish grin and said, "What I miss most is my mom's chocolate chip cookies." He laughed softly. One batch of those could fix just about everything. The words struck Edith like a wave breaking over her. Her throat closed up, and the TV in front of her faded away, replaced by a memory she hadn't let herself revisit in a long, long time. Back when Thomas was first deployed to Iraq, he used to send her letters. She still had every one of them, tied neatly with a green ribbon and tucked inside a weathered box labeled Tommy. One of those letters had said, "Your oatmeal cookies made it halfway around the world. Mom, the guys were fighting over them like they were treasure." One of them said they tasted like home. That's what you do for people. You send them home, even if it's just through a bite. Her eyes filled with tears. Slowly, Edith pushed herself up from the armrest, steadying her balance. She made her way into the kitchen, the same kitchen where Thomas used to sneak raw cookie dough when he thought she wasn't watching. And for the first time in months, she turned the oven on. She didn't know who the cookies would be for. She didn't need to know. That night, she baked a full batch of chocolate chip cookies, and for good measure, a pan of snickerdoodles, too. She lined an old cookie tin with wax paper and slipped in a handwritten note. To any soldier far from home, stay safe. Baked with care from a mother who remembers. That single gesture sparked something in her, a choice that would end up rippling far beyond the walls of her quiet little kitchen. The first tin went out on a Friday. Edith Jenkins stood patiently at the counter of the Fairview post office. The tin was wrapped carefully in brown paper, corners creased sharp and sealed with care. The young clerk behind the counter, polite but puzzled, squinted at the package and asked where it was headed. Without a word, Edith handed him a slip of paper on which she'd carefully copied an address from a map of U.S. military bases. Fort Freedom, Colorado. It was a place she'd never been in a state she had no ties to. But that didn't matter. That wasn't the point. That was the beginning. From then on, every Friday morning, before the sun even had a chance to rise, Edith would get up, her back stiff, her hands swollen with age and arthritis. She'd shrug on her faded blue cardigan, tie the apron Thomas had once gifted her, and begin creaming butter and sugar by hand. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon would fill the kitchen long before the rest of the town had stirred. She never knew who would open each tin. She never waited for replies. Still, with every batch, she tucked in a note, always handwritten. Sometimes she wrote, From a mother who understands. Other times, if you're having a hard day, I hope these help. You are not forgotten. Weeks passed, then months. No one ever wrote back. No calls, no emails, not even a generic form letter. But Edith didn't stop. There were Fridays when her arthritis was so bad she couldn't even grip the rolling pin. On those days, she sat down on a stool and worked the dough slowly, methodically. When her old Buick gave out, she called her neighbor's grandson for a ride. When he didn't pick up, she walked. Tote bag heavy with cookies, cane in hand, each step a quiet act of determination. She missed church sometimes, skipped lunch gatherings with the other ladies, but she never missed a Friday. Eventually, people in town began to notice. Some offered a quiet smile. Others whispered behind her back. One day at the grocery store, a cashier leaned toward another and murmured, "She's still doing that." Edith simply smiled. It wasn't about being seen. Every ribbon she tied around those tins was a promise, not just to Thomas, but to herself and to any soldier out there who might be feeling as isolated, as forgotten as she once had. Fridays became sacred. Not out of habit, but because in a world that moved too fast and paid too little attention, Edith Jenkins had chosen to be something different. Constant, quiet, steady, unwavering. And in that, there was a rare kind of bravery. At first, it was just curiosity. But as the years passed, that curiosity turned into town gossip. By the second year of her cookie ritual, Edith May Jenkins had become something of an enigma around Fairview. Folks at the diner had started calling her the Cookie Lady, though not always with kindness. The story of what she did floated around town like flowers sifted through a screen, softened, stretched, misremembered. "She's still sending those things to the army?" Someone muttered over a slice of cherry pie at Linda's cafe. "She just wants the attention," another replied, stirring her coffee without looking up. "You know how lonely folks get." Even at Zion Baptist, the church where Edith had taught Sunday school for more than 30 years. For 30 years, the atmosphere around her had slowly changed, like a shift in the wind you can't quite name but feel in your bones. Her prayer requests at church were quietly passed over without acknowledgement. When she offered warm greetings, they were returned with thin, polite smiles, ones that barely touched the eyes. During coffee hour, conversations would sometimes stop altogether as she walked by. It wasn't open cruelty, just that distant, courteous coldness that can sting more than outright rejection. But the blow that finally broke something in her came from the place she least expected, Harrison's Hardware. Years ago, it was there that her son Thomas had proudly bought her a new set of baking pans with his first paycheck from a part-time job. That memory still warmed her when she stepped inside. But things had changed. The store owner's son now ran the place. When Edith, with her usual gentle tone, asked whether the usual discount on flour and parchment paper still applied, the young man cleared his throat awkwardly. He avoided her gaze and said, "We're not really doing personal discounts anymore. Maybe just order online or something." The way he said it, so detached, stung in a way no raised voice ever could. And then came the article. A young journalist, eager to build a name for herself, had written a blog post that swept through the town's online circles. The headline hit like a slap. "Grandstanding Granny, Local Woman's Cookie Campaign Sparks Debate." The article didn't interview her, didn't ask her why she did what she did. It simply labeled her efforts as emotional patriotism dressed up as charity, accused her of performative nostalgia designed to play on people's sympathy for veterans. A publicity stunt in the guise of kindness. The post didn't go viral exactly, but it made the rounds, enough for people to look at her differently. The post office clerk, once chatty and cheerful, now offered her only short, clipped nods. Her neighbor Martha no longer waved from across the street. Even the young cashier at the grocery store hesitated before scanning her bag of sugar and asked, "Still sending those cookies?" As if the answer might finally be no. But Edith never defended herself. She didn't speak up, didn't write any response, didn't leave a comment online. She just kept baking. Every single Friday, like she had for 8 solid years, her home filled with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla and the soft crackle of warm parchment. Her hands, stiff now, sometimes swollen, still moved with care and memory, shaping each cookie as if Thomas might walk through the door and grab one off the tray like he used to. The little notes she tucked into every tin were still written by hand. Not a word of bitterness ever slipped in. Only quiet compassion. Because Edith Jenkins never begged for applause. She didn't do it for thanks or recognition or community approval. She did it because she remembered. Because somewhere far away there were soldiers, tired, lonely, forgotten, who might taste even a bit of home in something soft and sweet. And if the world around her had grown too skeptical, too jaded to see the heart in what she did, well, that didn't matter. She'd bake anyway. That morning was a Friday, just like all the others. The house was quiet. Outside, the first threads of daylight hung low in a pale sky. She moved slowly these days. Her knees ached with every step, and her fingers were stiffer than there had ever been. But she kept on. The routine had become something sacred, a rhythm of memory and purpose. This week marked the 416th time she'd sent cookies. The batch had cooled on the rack, chocolate chip, the kind Thomas always loved best, with the edges just slightly crisp. She reached for her note cards, just like she always did. But this morning her hands trembled more than usual. The pen slipped halfway through the sentence, leaving a deep blue blot across the page. She paused, letting out a weary sigh, ready to crumple it and begin again. But she didn't. Maybe it was the weight in her chest or the ache in her joints. Maybe it was the quiet accumulation of so many Fridays gone by. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time. Instead of starting over, she just kept writing, slowly, carefully, and all she wrote was this: "My son loved these before he was taken from me." No embellishment, no apology, just the truth, laid bare on paper. She folded the card with care, slipped it beneath the wax paper, sealed the tin with a ribbon, and walked it to the post office in silence. The clerk didn't meet her eyes. Edith didn't mind. She passed the tin across the counter, and like always, the package was on its way. What she couldn't have known, what no one could have imagined, was how far that tin would go. It passed through sorting facilities, boarded military cargo planes, crossed oceans and deserts. After 2 base transfers, it landed nearly halfway across the world, in a dusty, wind-scoured corner of northern Iraq known as Firewatch Outpost. There, among crates of supplies, weather-beaten mail bags, and half-spoiled rations, the tin sat unnoticed for a while. Until one day a soldier, exhausted, grimy, and worn to the bone by war, opened it. Captain Eric Langford hadn't planned to open anything that day. The mail drop had come late. The air was heavy with dry heat and powdered sand. His unit had just returned from a grueling 48-hour patrol. Tempers were frayed, energy was low. The tin looked almost out of place, sitting there on his desk amid the harsh edges of Army-issue gear and sun-bleached beige. It was old-fashioned. Something about it didn't belong. But he opened it anyway, wrapped in wax paper and tied with a soft blue ribbon. It stirred something in him, a faint, flickering memory he couldn't quite catch hold of. Not yet. Without thinking, he untied the ribbon and opened the bundle, bracing himself for the usual. Maybe stale crackers or dried fruit, the kind of half-hearted snack that made its way across continents in care packages. But what he found instead were cookies, real cookies, soft, golden, a little crumbled from the journey, but unmistakably homemade. The kind no one had tasted in months, the kind that carried the scent of kitchens and warmth and home. And then he saw the note. The ink was smudged, the handwriting slightly shaky, but steady enough to read. "My son loved these before he was taken from me." Captain Eric Langford stopped cold. His eyes flicked to the return address printed at the top. E. Jenkins, Fairview, Nebraska. Something heavy shifted inside his chest, deep and sudden. Jenkins. Thomas Jenkins. No. He reached for the drawer in his desk, the one he rarely opened. Inside was an old laminated photo, its edges curled and worn from years of handling. It was a group shot taken in another lifetime. His unit. Smiling young men, most of them gone now, ghosts that lingered in his memory. His own face stared back at him, barely out of boot camp. And there, back row, third from the left, stood Corporal Thomas Jenkins. Tall, quiet, steady as they came. Eric closed his eyes and the memory returned like a dust storm. The roadside, the heat, the unnatural stillness that came just before it all went to hell. And then, Thomas's voice, IED, he'd seen it, called it out just in time, saved them all. His warning had cut through the silence, snapping the squad into action. Because of him, two men lived through that day, because he'd been watching, because he cared. Langford had been the one kneeling beside him afterward, hands pressed against wounds too deep to close. The medevac helicopter had circled above like a slow, reluctant angel. In those final ragged minutes, Thomas had spoken, his words soft with pain. "Mom's sending cookies. When I get home." Eric had remembered those words, but he'd buried them, deep, far beneath layers of duty and time. Until now, until this note, until this tin, until her. Captain Langford did not move for a long time. Outside his quarters, the desert wind whispered through the canvas and sand. Inside, his hands trembled, not from fear or cold, but from something older. Grief, gratitude, memory. Edith Jenkins hadn't just sent cookies. She had sent her son. A fragment of him, a piece of a promise long overdue, now finally delivered. That night, Captain Langford didn't sleep. Long after lights out, he sat on the edge of his cot, the empty tin beside him, the note folded carefully in his lap. Something inside him had stirred awake, and it refused to be still. For years, he had carried the weight of that day, the sound of Thomas's voice, the final promise left behind. Now, in the quiet of a foreign night, that promise had come back, delivered in wax paper and handwritten love. By sunrise, Langford knew what he had to do. This wasn't just a gesture to be filed away. Not another formality lost in paperwork or folded flags. This was personal. This meant something. He started small, reached out quietly, tracked down the last surviving members of Thomas Jenkins's original unit, some long since retired, others stationed on distant bases. One by one they responded. Every man who heard the name Thomas Jenkins answered the same way. "Yes, sir. Wherever. Whenever." Then came the next call to a friend in the Nebraska National Guard. It wasn't a formal request, more like a favor. A debt whispered in reverence. "She's been baking cookies for soldiers every Friday," Langford explained. 8 years, never asked for anything, never sought recognition. "I think it's time we gave her something back." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, "We'll make it happen." No cameras, no reporters, no ceremony, just a quiet salute. A true moment between those who serve and those who never stop caring for them. Langford planned every detail. A Black Hawk helicopter, off-duty but sanctioned, dress blues, a folded flag, a handcrafted plaque engraved with her name, and most important of all, the dog tags. Thomas's tags, the ones Langford had carried with him all these years. It wasn't in any manual. It wouldn't go through Pentagon channels. It wouldn't make the evening news, but it would matter. It would make history in one quiet backyard, in one small Nebraska town, for one woman who had spent 8 long years sending love into the unknown, never knowing that love had landed, that it had reached men who still remembered, who still honored, who never forgot. And when the day was set, Captain Langford folded this ever since. "I promised him, promised myself that I'd return it to you, ma'am. He talked about you all the time, about the farm, about the cookies, about how the sun set just right behind the barn in the fall. Said he'd take me here one day once it was all over." Edith didn't speak, couldn't. Her hand hovered just shy of the tag, as if reaching for the past. Her breath shuddered. Then slowly, reverently, she accepted the small, battered token of her son's life. Her fingers closed around it, the chain slipping through her palm like water, like time. Her shoulders shook once, but she held her ground. Captain Langford dropped his gaze, then looked up again, blinking hard. "We never forgot him. Not one of us. He was brave, kind, the best kind of man." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the others still standing at attention. "They're here because they wanted to be. Every one of them." Behind her, Ellie steadied her aunt again as Edith took a half-step forward. Her voice came thin but steady, like the last page of a well-read book. "Thank you for coming, for remembering." Langford gave a solemn nod. "We remember every day." And then, one by one, the soldiers approached her. each with a silent nod, a murmured ma'am, or simply a hand laid over their heart. Each pressed something into her palm, a medal, a photo, a folded note, all things that had once belonged to or been touched by Thomas Jenkins. The weight of memory gently passed, like torchlight in the dark. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows over the pasture. Chickens clucked nervously in the distance, and the wind rustled the cornfields like whispers of old stories. The helicopter waited, its presence now more guardian than intruder. And still, Edith stood, her spine straight as the Kansas horizon. She looked at Langford one last time, her voice gentler now, but full of steel. "He kept his promise, didn't he?" Langford nodded. "Yes, ma'am, he did." And so had they. He had carried it with him for years, not knowing what to do with it, until now. With a care that spoke volumes, he placed it into Edith's trembling hand. A sudden hush fell over the porch. Time itself seemed to still. Edith looked down at the small piece of metal now resting in her palm. Her son's name, though the edges were dulled by time and wear, was clearly etched into the dog tag. It was undeniably his. She said nothing. She only stared at it, her fingers slowly curling around it like a prayer, whispered through closed lips. The quiet deepened. Then Captain Langford stepped to the side, allowing another Marine to approach. In his hands was a polished wooden plaque, gleaming in the afternoon light. As he held it out, Langford's voice rang clear as he read the inscription aloud. "To Edith May Jenkins, for 8 years of faithful service to the spirits of the deployed. Through silence, storm, and sacrifice, your cookies crossed oceans. They reminded the forgotten that they were still remembered. And in my darkest hour, they saved my life." Another hush settled over the gathered crowd. Captain Langford turned his gaze back to Edith, and in his eyes a brightness shimmered, not of tears shed, but of profound gratitude held back with the strength of a soldier. "You never knew," he continued, "but your cookies reached 7 different countries. They passed from one unit to another, were opened in bunkers, shared on Christmas Eve, eaten during sandstorms and after firefights. Some of those soldiers never knew your name, but they felt your care in every bite. You reminded us why we fight." Edith couldn't speak. The words clung to her throat, locked behind the surge of emotion rising in her chest. Tears streamed slowly down her cheeks, silent as the moment itself. She clutched the plaque to her chest with one hand and her son's dog tag in the other, anchoring herself in memory and meaning. Captain Langford offered a soft, reverent smile. "There's no official title for what you've done, ma'am," he said gently, "but we have something far more important." He turned, gesturing toward the soldiers standing in formation behind him. "We call you the Mother of Honor, and there are thousands of us who will never forget what you did, quietly, faithfully, week after week. You kept a promise that was never yours to keep." And with that, one by one, every soldier on the lawn stepped forward and saluted her. No one spoke, but in each raised hand there was a thank you, a recognition, a farewell, a blessing. It didn't take long for the moment to ripple out into the world. Someone in the crowd had captured the instant when Captain Langford saluted Edith, her hand wrapped around the dog tag, the plaque pressed to her heart, the tears glistening on her face. The video spread fast, first on social media, then in the national news. Within hours, it had gone viral. Within days, it had touched hearts across the country. The story had all the makings of legend, the cookie lady who never stopped believing. 8 years of quiet kindness answered by a helicopter and a salute. A mother's silent vow fulfilled at last. Main Street was soon crowded with news crews. National talk shows called. Book deals were proposed, magazine editors requested interviews, and even a Major League Baseball team extended an offer for her to throw the ceremonial first pitch. Each time, Edith politely declined with the same quiet grace that had guided her every Friday for the last 8 years. "I didn't do it for the cameras," she told Ellie softly, "and I won't start now." She returned to her routine. She still walked Duke. She still sat in her old wooden rocker working through crosswords. She still baked cookies, maybe not every Friday now, but often enough to keep time with the beat of her heart. Her life remained steady, even as the world around her shifted in quiet ways. At Zion Baptist Church, a sincere apology was spoken from the pulpit one Sunday morning. Pastor Graham, voice trembling, admitted what the congregation had overlooked. Not just the cookies, but the quiet faith that had baked them into being. "We forgot what humble service really looks like," he said, his voice cracking. Edith reminded us. The whispers that once followed her in town fell away. In their place came handshakes, smiles, warm hugs in the supermarket aisles. At Fairview High, where Edith had served generations of students sloppy joes and apple slices, the senior class voted, unanimously, to rename their annual fundraiser the Jenkins Bake Sale. Because kindness travels, even the once critical blogger who had accused her of showboating issued a heartfelt apology. "I got it wrong," the post read. "Turns out real heroism doesn't always wear boots. Sometimes it wears an apron." But perhaps the most touching tribute appeared on the brick wall of the Fairview Public Library. A group of local artists collaborated to paint a mural 20 feet wide, a sweeping landscape of memory and honor. On the left, Edith stood in her kitchen, holding a tray of cookies fresh from the oven. On the right, her son, Corporal Thomas Jenkins, stood in uniform beneath the rising light of a painted dawn, smiling. And between them, in sweeping golden cursive, were just two words: promise kept. People came from nearby towns just to see it. Veterans left flowers at the base of the wall. Strangers paused in silence, tears on their faces, moved not just by the story, but by the unwavering spirit of a woman who had never once asked for thanks. Early that morning, long before the crowds began to gather and the sun had fully risen, Edith came alone. She held Duke's leash in one hand, the old dog calm at her side, and stood in front of the wall. The colors of her son's face, painted among so many others, caught the morning light in a soft glow. She didn't move for a while. She just looked, standing still, her eyes locked on Tommy's familiar features, now immortalized in quiet tribute. The wind picked up slightly, brushing strands of gray hair across her face. In that moment, she leaned in just a little and whispered something meant for only him. "You got them, Tommy, just like you said you would." Her voice was soft, steady. There were no tears, no grand gestures, only that quiet statement, a promise remembered and a victory acknowledged. And then she smiled. It was small, but it was real, a private, content kind of smile. She gave Duke's leash a gentle tug, turned toward the path that led home, and began walking away. Each step seemed a little lighter than the one before. A weight had lifted, a circle had closed, a mother had kept her word. In a world that races forward without looking back, where the next breaking headline replaces the last before it's even understood, and where kind deeds are rarely noticed because they don't scream for attention, Edith May Jenkins reminded us of something enduring, something deeper. She didn't bake for recognition. She didn't show up every week hoping someone would thank her or remember her name. She baked because something inside her, something tender and unwavering, told her she must. Because love like that doesn't know how to sit still. And though she was never loud, never one to chase the spotlight, her silence somehow carried further than most could shout. What would happen if more of us lived the way Edith did? What if we did good simply because it was right, not because someone might see? What if we honored our word, even when no one else knew we had spoken it aloud? In times like these, when every disagreement feels louder than any act of grace, and where bitterness too often chokes out kindness, maybe what we need isn't another argument. Maybe what we need is a plate of warm cookies left on a porch, a short note in imperfect handwriting that says, "I see you, I still care." A gesture that asks nothing in return but offers everything that matters. And now, maybe it's your turn to think, have you ever been on the receiving end of a small, unexpected kindness that shifted your whole day? Do you believe still that a single quiet person can reach across the noise and make a difference? If Edith's story touched you, if it reminded you of your own mother, or someone you once loved and lost, or a promise you yourself are still keeping, then share it. Let someone else hear it, not because it's dramatic or shocking or viral, but because it's real, and real matters more than ever. There are still people out there like Edith, people who keep baking, keep giving, keep loving in silence. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of them. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing that quiet stories still deserve to be told. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, it's often the softest voices that carry the furthest.